We're live. Robert J. Conley here. Come on in. This video is about the characteristics, the strengths and weaknesses of what I call, or I should say many of us call stabilizing leaders. And this matters because every organization needs stabilizing leaders. And as importantly, you might be one, or you're in all likelihood working with at least one. So first, some housekeeping. If you haven't already, please hit subscribe. If you feel as if you've learned from this video, please hit like. Or even if you didn't learn but you liked it, just hit like. And then finally, if you have any questions or comments, I always try to keep my eye out to see if there are any live questions. Please feel free to ask away. All right, so what are the characteristics of stabilizing leaders? And I'm going to just share some words and add a few, share words and add a few words. So above all else, stabilizing leaders are considered conscientious. They do what they say. And they're also cautious never to say something they're not going to do. So they're reliable. And they take great pride in that. Reliability and conscientiousness are very important characteristics. They're very precise and exacting in their word usage. They finish what they start, and not only do they finish, they expect those around them to also finish what they start. They can be very patient and persevering. It's not that they can't have their moments of impatience, but for the most part, very thorough. Examining details, going through things systematically, steadily, and being patient and thorough. They also would like to be considered respectable and keepers of traditions, and just orderly, good citizens. So that's in a nutshell how I would summarize stabilizers. And what are the strengths? What do stabilizers bring to the table? Well, the leadership role of so one of the things when I talk about leadership is a lot of times people default to thinking that just means the visionary leader or the catalytic leader, the one who just fires everybody up and ignites. But excuse me, but as I've discussed, there are these four prototypical leadership instincts. And so the role of stabilizing leadership usually shows up in administrators and supervisors. And, these are people they're just like instinctive keepers of schedules and agendas. They're very organized. Things are always kept in good order and in the right place. If you go into the office of a stabilizer, there's a good chance that there are going to be a dozen binders on the credenza behind them, all in very good order and having all the facts of operation readily available. Stabilizing leaders are very punctual. I think it could be their group that came up with the rule that, if you're not 15 minutes early, you're late. And it's important to know that when you're dealing, all of us at some level take tardiness as none of us embrace tardiness. However, it's important to realize that when you're dealing with stabilizers, that it can come across as a personal insult and as a disrespect for the time, for that person's time and for that very person. So it's very important to know that they will be punctual and that you should be punctual. Stabilizers are good at establishing and following rules and regulations. They are, they're natural at establishing and documenting standard operating procedures. They're good at flow charting for the most part. There's some that don't like flow charting, but a lot of times that is a way that they understand and document a system. They're the ultimate job description writers. They have an ability to break things down and to write them out in ways that become documentation of job descriptions. They're very I can't remember if I said this already or not, but they're very good at establishing and sticking with routines. So there, there is another group that's very good at establishing routines, but they don't necessarily themselves stick to them. Stabilizers stick to routines. Um, they have a strong inner commitment to things remaining constant and familiar. Sudden changes can actually be very upsetting. Um, this group, as a group, there are exceptions, but as a group, aren't wild about things like surprise parties. Um, when in management, they're always looking, as leaders, they're always looking for opportunities to consolidate operations, add efficiencies. Um, there is an innate sense of duty in executing and adhering to contracts. Um, and not last, and well, the last point I have, but by no means the least, is that there is a strong inner commitment to preserving and nurturing traditions. In all likelihood, it's a stabilizer that makes sure that the annual 4th of July picnic always happens. Hopefully, they'll keep happening. We'll see. Um, but the traditions of a company are usually upheld by a stabilizer type leader. So, what are some of the difficulties with stabilizing leaders? Well, at times they can prize stability over innovation, and I'll talk a little bit of the nuance of that later. I'll just leave it at that right now. But so they'll prize stability over innovation. Tend to avoid conflict. Do not welcome conflict. Prone to over worry. If you remember one of my earlier videos, I talked about those 4 ways of being. And so this group is their way of being is concerned. And so there is an innate over worry concern that is just in their metabolism. Um, they are in danger of micromanaging. They are in danger of building bureaucracies that become so big that they have trouble adapting to new ways. It's kind of the natural evolution of companies that as they grow, they add more stabilizers, and it's almost like more stabilizers beget more stabilizers. Um, so that can grow to where it actually inhibits a company from adapting to market conditions. Um, there is a tendency to put work above all else, observable work. So at times they'll stifle morale under the banner of, you know what, just be quiet and work harder. Um, and a lot of times there'll be other people that say, well, there's new ways to do these. There's technology we could bring in, those kinds of things. But those kinds of disruptions actually are more troubling than like adding another person here, adding another person there, emphasizing just work harder. And over time, that can start to demoralize people. And you see that over and over again in corporate America, where there have been mergers, there have been just all kinds of layoffs, and the stability of the organization and the stability of the cash flow uh, is put above the bigger picture mix and matching of technology, new ways, innovation, and instead just relying on making people work harder. Um, the stabilizers can tend to be very formal in their procedures. The one way that you might be, I don't want to come across as I'm making fun of stabilizers, but one of the clues that you're dealing with a stabilizer is that they might be kind of inordinately proud that they have an open door policy. There are other styles that, like, it's just a natural to have an open door policy. For stabilizers who really like their uninterrupted work, it's kind of a big deal to be more informal and to have open door policies. Um, Whatever you do, don't ever go around their back or disrespect established lines of communication. That will never go well for a subordinate of a stabilizer type. I may have mentioned this, that when they're CEOs, they might over rely on consolidation and cost cutting to squeeze more profit. Um, Another tell is that stabilizers are prone to overanalyze. They actually have trouble making decisions. As much as they like checking off the completed box, there still is this tendency to overanalyze and have trouble making decisions. One of the ways that they'll try to overcome that is by forming lots of committees. That actually happens in a quick side story. Hopefully, I can make it quick, but also informative. So, the Ford Motor Company was founded by Henry Ford. He was the iron-fisted king of Ford Motor Company. You did it the way he wanted it, for all the years that he ran the place. General Motors was actually the result of mergers and acquisitions that were put together by a guy named Billy Durant. And Billy was quite the guy. He may have actually been I don't know if this is exactly spot on, go with it for right now, that he was kind of the Donald Trump of the era. He's quite the promoter. But in putting together all these companies in really fast fashion, he created a tremendous amount of chaos. And so, very few people have actually heard the name Billy Durant or William C. Durant in terms of General Motors. The name that people who study management hear much more is Alfred Sloan. And so Alfred Sloan was brought in after all these companies are together and it's not going well and they're on the brink of bankruptcy. Alfred Sloan was brought in as the stabilizer. And one of the things that he did was form committees, because the truth is he didn't actually know what needed to be done, but he knew that if he formed these committees, or he had faith that if he formed these committees, enough wisdom could come out of them and they would stabilize the company. And in fact, that worked. It worked until the foreign automobile makers started coming to the United States in the 70s. And eating away at profit. And all of a sudden, all the bureaucracy, all the committees that General Motors had put in place to run a very stable operation were now the biggest obstacle to them adapting to new market conditions. So, that's another kind of old-timey story from corporate America, but one of especially at the time, it's just an unavoidable lesson in what happens when the bureaucracy overtakes the organization's ability to adapt. And there are some, I mean, I would say just be a student. Look at things going on in politics these days through that lens. How much of it is because we have a government that just can't adapt, and how much, what else is going on? So I just raise that as, if you want to be a student of this and observe what's going on through the lens that I'm presenting here regarding stabilizers. And then finally, one of the more challenging aspects of stabilizers is that they're innately good at holding others accountable, but they can get defensive very quickly when others seek to hold them accountable. And so it is there's some belief that there's like this ingrained fear of being wrong, which kind of, when you look at it, kind of ties into the whole thing of being concerned and of being a worrier. And so there is that element that's already going on in their metabolism. And then when someone else confronts them or tries to hold them accountable, you're kind of already on the precipice. So in dealing with that, it's really important for the person confronting to put their best diplomatic resources to use in dealing with that. All right, so that's where the challenges are, the difficulties are. So when dealing, I may have touched on some of these already, but this is specific to when dealing with stabilizers. You should, first of all, always be prepared to share your reasoning and rationale on decisions you've made if you're reporting them, and especially if you have deviated from standard procedures and protocols. When you're going to meet with a stabilizer, always give them as much information as you can ahead of the meeting so that they can prepare. Stabilizers don't like to be expected to improvise or to fully understand or consume data on the spot. So pass on data ahead of time. Present concise, fact-based briefings before meetings actually take place. And then, as I mentioned, don't expect them to improvise or to make sudden decisions. Their processing takes time, and that cake needs to bake. And so you need to get used to presenting, not necessarily expecting instantaneous answers, and then getting them when the stabilizer is ready. If you want to get more information about what thought processes they might have used in making a decision or some insight into their thinking, use tact. Again, it goes back to diplomacy, and be careful not to imply that you're questioning their competence. That is thin ice. I mentioned it a minute ago, but just to reemphasize, respect lines of communication. If you don't like what's happening, do not go above that person's head. It is not the way to go when you're dealing with a stabilizer. And lastly, what I would say is that temperance is greatly admired by stabilizers. It's basically the habit of being of having moderation in everything. And so that is a cardinal virtue that stabilizers hold dear. So to give you a little insight, I just picked 3 different people, and again, this is one of those hard ones where you're always just trying to figure out, who my audience would know and not know. Most people hopefully have heard that Harry Truman was once president of the United States, and he was famous for "the buck stops here." So he was a stabilizer. He showed up after World War II to help stabilize the United States. So Harry Truman. Andy Reid, who is now with the Kansas City Chiefs, he's a stabilizer. He coached the Philadelphia Eagles for years, never made it to the Super Bowl. He was able to add some strategic capabilities to his coaching team. He's got a strategic thinker in his quarterback, and so he's actually on his way to his second Super Bowl. But to tell you a little bit about his insight, I love this quote. It's, "In everything, it's my responsibility. In everything, it's my responsibility." Is that not the epitome of conscientiousness? And then one of the all-time great stabilizer coaches, John Wooden. Talent is God-given, be humble. Fame is man-given, be grateful. And conceit is self-given, be careful. So right there again, temperance. Show temperance in everything you do. If you don't have time to do it right, when will you have time to redo it? And he also always said he had I have three rules for my players: no profanity, don't criticize a teammate, and never be late. So punctuality is a very important thing for them. It's important for all of us, but especially for them. Now I'm gonna go through. So I'm gonna wrap up with talking about where about the timing of bringing stabilizers into companies, and where stabilizers can look for opportunities. But I'm going to tell this as quickly as possible, and I think I'm going to go with the completely short version. But one of the great shows to watch different personality types is Mad Men. It went off the air a few years ago. It was on for like 7 seasons. But it is just terrific. And from time, I might even do some full episodes on the different personality types and styles that are depicted in Mad Men. But one of the just great episodes, I actually wrote it down. It was the second episode of season 7. And there's a fellow named Lou Avery who is a stabilizer, and he has been airdropped into the company to replace Don Draper as the head of creative. Now, creative is it's like the antithesis of what a stabilizer wants to be in the middle of. And in this particular episode, and this will be meaningful if you've seen the show, there's a character, Peggy, whose last name I can't remember right now. Anyway, Peggy is a creative, and Peggy was taught by Don to just keep looking for the great idea until it shows up. Don't settle for less. And so Peggy is now dealing, instead of with Don, she's dealing with our dear friend Lou Avery, and she makes a pitch on something she doesn't love. Lou says, "Okay, go with it," and signs off on it. Over the weekend, Peggy has second thoughts. She wants to reopen the case, goes into Lou in the Monday morning and says, "Lou, I just don't think that's the best idea." And he just looks at her like she doesn't exist. He's like, "Oh, I checked that off on Friday. There's no need to reopen it. Why are you torturing yourself? We're done. We're moving on. It's done." And so that is a critical component of the stabilizers. Like, check it off, move on, keep moving. And like I said, much needed in many organizations, because without it, there's a bunch of stuff that would never see the light of day or never get completed. But at the same time, it has to be in the right places. So part of that right places is the timing. When stabilization is a natural part of the growth cycle. In the seasons, it's summer. Summer is when there's just stable growth for the most part. It's not the tumultuous weather of spring or fall. It's just growth, and so that's what stabilization looks like. It happens in humans and stabilizes somewhere in your late teens, early 20s. I'm never sure. Uh, Sometimes I think it's also a moving target with different generations. Anyway, I digress. So it happens in companies too. And when does it happen for companies? When they're ready. So there's no pat answer. But startups, it's a fine line, because if you add stabilizers to a startup company too soon, they'll choke the growth out of it. Their desire for stability will not allow for the chaos that's needed for growth. That almost happened to Apple. Apple brought in a fellow named John Sculley in the hopes that his experience at the enormous Pepsi-Cola company, PepsiCo, would help stabilize Apple. What nobody quite knew then was that it was premature to stabilize. The technology, while it had been around for, I don't remember exactly, I'll say maybe as much as 20 years, and this company had been at it, it still was not ready for the kind of stabilizer that John Sculley was. And so it almost killed the company. And it was only by Steve Jobs coming in and reinvigorating innovation and bringing new life to the company that it is the behemoth that it is today. It so easily could have gone the other way. And so the flip side, so you bring it in too early, you can choke it. If you bring it in too late, the company can fracture. It can be so chaotic, it can be for too long, and there's not the stability, because stability needs to come in as you're getting reliable cash flow. And so you need to balance it. But when it's and then when finally stability gets out of hand and it like becomes the mission of the company's on a death march. I mean, it's, study Sears in the current era. And, that when the company becomes about nothing other than generating cash flow, it is a dead company walking. So, places for stabilizer leadership. Remember, every company needs, even a startup needs an element of stability, not necessarily ruling the company, but elements of stability. The challenge with startups is that the metabolism of stabilizers is such that they may not be able to stomach the roller coaster ride of a startup. And so there's this little dynamic of it may or may not be mutually beneficial for each on that front. But as growing companies come into consistent cash flow, and especially when they're starting to talk about going public, that is when opportunity is ripe for stabilizers looking for an upside, because it is in that, Wall Street won't take a company public until they see stabilized cash flow and it's predictable. And so there's a great opportunity there as far as in technology and startups. That's where you kind of want to hit it. But overall, if you have a real, if a lot of the things I talked about for stabilizers really hit and go, wow, I'm really stabilizer. I really want that certainty. I want that stability. You really need to think in terms of big established companies. And I know and have worked with plenty of stabilizer types who have tried the other arenas, and in in the long run, the one that's always been the good match has been established large organizations, government, where those consistencies that a stabilizer needs. Because if a stabilizer feels like it's always up to them to impose stability, that is going to wear out the stabilizer also. Stabilizer loves to contribute to make sure the stability is ongoing, but to have to like enforce it against a bunch of crazy visionary renegade software developers or whatever, nah, it's not going to work. But to be part of that team and to be stabilizing, that's a good match. So the thing that stabilizers should do, because I work with plenty of stabilizers whose scorn for the chaos of startups and kind of just scorn when they see chaos or disorder. What I train them to do is every time they see that, instead of wasting energy on scorn, just look at, oh, there's another opportunity for me, and it could be then, it could be a little bit later, but in chaos lies the opportunity for stabilizers. All right, so that's what I've got on that. And join me next video. I will be talking about the critical role that tactical leadership plays in getting things done, and bringing. It's actually the precursor or complementary to bringing companies to stability. So that's it for now. Cheers.